So why doesn't everybody go ahead and open up the boxes? There's a little test tube there that has a funnel on top. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna spit in the test tube.
DNA testing has become cheap, easy, and fun. All you have to do is spit into a tube.
Try not to have it like a whole lot of bubbles. You really want to give them a sample so that they can read it.
6 weeks later, you have the results. Millions have done it. But what exactly do DNA tests tell us about who we are? Researchers at the DNA Discussion Project at West Chester University in Pennsylvania are seeking answers to these questions.
When the human genome was ultimately mapped, articles started to come out to say that you could trace somebody's ancestry by looking at their genome. And I thought, here's a way to link science and the discussion about diversity. How did people talk in your family about who you are, about what race you are, about your ethnicity? How was that explained in your family?
My family always talks about like intermarriage or intermingling with Native Americans, but never about intermingling with whites or Europeans. But there's very clearly lots of like lighter skinned black people in our family. So I know that it's somewhere down the line, I'm assuming, but nobody has ever discussed it.
And the first time I told my mom I was doing this, she was like, oh God. Like she was scared because I feel like in my family there's like a lot of different little secrets.
The goal of the DNA Discussion Project is to encourage conversations about race in a positive way, beginning from perspectives of similarity rather than of difference.
With the sequencing of the human genome in 2003, the doors opened to ancestry testing. A team of scientists at Stanford University is using DNA to study the complex origins of human diversity.
What DNA changes do you carry that make you unique? What DNA changes do you carry that are similar to mom? What DNA changes do you carry that are similar to dad or granddad? And it is a book about you, and everyone's profile is completely unique.
Humans are much more similar than you may think. All human beings are 99.9% identical. That 0.1% variation actually comes from ancient DNA.
Somewhere between 50 to 100,000 years ago, at the inception of our species, the human genome pool was sampled as we went through the great human diasporas and migrating out of Africa to colonize the rest of the world. And most of the variation that we think of today, so-called common DNA variation, is actually quite ancient and shared across different human groups.
The Ancestry test compares your DNA to the genetic signature of different regions of the world. Most companies keep large databases of all the people they've tested, so they can match you to close and distant relatives, and also give you clues to where those people may be located in the world.
And so what we're literally seeing are the ancestors and the segments of the ancestors' genomes that have percolated down into modern-day populations.
For the past decade, Lawton and Foman have been inviting groups of students to take the Ancestry test.
The first thing I always like to ask is, did anybody have like an immediate reaction to their results? After the reveal, we asked people to discuss the relationship between their stories and what they find in their DNA.
I think when I was here last time, I was talking about how in black families, we don't talk a lot about having like European blood. Yes. And so my family story is that we never mention it. And so, but the story is that we have a lot of like Native American or indigenous blood. And then I like get the results and it's like 13% European and I'm like, and 3% Native American.
I was most upset that there was no Native American. That really was the thing that upset me the most.
Oh, tell me why that upset you.
Because I had always thought that was a part of who I was. For it not to show up at all, that shocked me.
How many of you had stories in your family of Native Americans?
A big majority of our respondents or participants in the study received profiles that include a lot of races or ethnicities that they did not expect. And when this happens, they have to reconcile that piece of scientific information with all the other factors that go into their process of identification.
I've just got some questions to ask my father, that's all.
Yeah, my mom will be getting a call when I get out of here.
And what ends up happening is you break down any simple traditional notion of race. There aren't 3 or 5 or 10 human races, but rather there's this beautiful continuum. On average, an African and American individual would have about 75 to 80% West African ancestry and about 20 to 25% European ancestry.
I got 28% Africa, so I could say I'm quarter African now. But it doesn't change who I am and my identity. I still identify myself as Puerto Rican.
You don't know what you're going to get when you do an ancestry test, and that's part of the fun and part of the risk, right? So you could find out that you have a more diverse history than you expected, or you might find out that Grandpa wasn't Grandpa, and you have to be prepared for that going into it.
I love the idea of using DNA to encourage more discussion among a wider variety of people about our backgrounds. And I also like to think that it's a way of approaching the discussion of diversity that assumes that we're all diverse, that we're in it together, and that we're more alike than we are different.
Of quiet supersonic flight, science and supplies delivered to the space station, and uncovering the farthest star ever seen. A few of the stories to tell you about this week at NASA. We've selected Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company to design, build, and test the low-boom flight demonstration supersonic experimental aircraft, or X-plane, that reduces a sonic boom to a gentle thump. Work is expected to last through December 2021, followed by flights over select U.S. cities starting in mid-2022 to collect data about community responses to the flights. More than 5,800 pounds of scientific experiments and supplies were delivered to the International Space Station on April 4th to support dozens of the more than 250 investigations aboard the space station. The experiments deal with how the human body, plants, and materials behave in space. SpaceX's Dragon resupply spacecraft delivered the cargo 2 days after it was launched from Florida. This is the company's 14th resupply mission to the station. Our Hubble Space Telescope has uncovered the farthest individual star ever seen. The enormous blue star, nicknamed Icarus, is located more than halfway across the universe and would normally be too faint to view, even with the largest telescopes. But thanks to a quirk of nature called gravitational lensing that tremendously amplifies the star's feeble glow, Hubble was able to spot the star. Icarus is so far away that its light has taken 9 billion years to reach Earth. Our Chandra X-ray Observatory has been used to study a cosmic cold front located in the Perseus galaxy cluster that extends for about 2 million light years, or about 10 billion miles. The cold front consists of a cool band of gas that is about 30 million degrees, moving through hot gas that is about 80 million degrees. It formed about 5 billion years ago and has been traveling at speeds of about 300,000 miles per hour ever since. That's what's up this week at NASA. For more on these and other stories, follow us on the web at nasa.gov/twan.
Landsat imagery of a salt flat in Chile shows the expansion of lithium mining operations from 1991 to 2018. This salt flat has the planet's largest deposit of lithium, a key ingredient in rechargeable batteries. The salt flat has hard crusts of sodium chloride. Lithium-rich brine is pumped to the surface and is sent to evaporation ponds. The water evaporates in the dry environment and leaves behind concentrated salts. The ponds vary in color because of varying amounts of salts in the water. Brighter ponds contain more concentrated salts. Deep blue indicate more water. Images created from Landsat data help monitor changes taking place on the Earth's surface, along with the effects that resource extraction has on the local environment.
In 1989, a group of scientists was assembled to decode the human genome under the direction of Dr. James Watson.
One of Watson's big motivations here was to try to recruit the best and brightest from many different disciplines, biology, but also physics, chemistry, engineering, because all of those would have to get together if this was going to work.
Many of the biologists, and I love them dearly, of course, were dragged into it kicking or screaming in the beginning because they failed to see the tremendous value that such an enterprise would provide the field.
The talent turned out to be all over the world, so you have to basically make it possible for those bright minds to get engaged where they are. They're not going to all move to join this effort.
Genomics has fundamentally changed the way we do science. It brought the notion of team science and collaboration to biology.
Curious thing about collaboration, it's also intensely competitive. Each person wants to achieve something personal. They want to make their hit, on the problem, but then immediately they want to share it with the other, and the other learns immediately. And so you ratchet each other up.
From the beginning of the Genome Project, there was a fairly strong sense of enthusiasm in the public sector, the private, and academia.
We had lots of support from Republicans, partly because Newt Gingrich was interested in science, and I knew it. There's no partisan difference in everybody wanting to live as long as they can.
I think there's a lesson there. It isn't a big monolithic project. It was a big challenge, but it brought people together. And I think that's what we have to do in the future.
When the Human Genome Project was started, it's important to note the technology of sequencing was not developed yet. So it's, in a sense, a project that was launched with a wing and a prayer.
We couldn't sequence it at that time. The machines were nothing like fast enough. There were no machines even. Sequencing was done by hand.
I thought we might have to do it brute force, and I was quietly prepared to use the old-fashioned technology just because it was so important to get it done.
There are a lot of things, that would make life easier that just hadn't been invented yet.
It'd be a 100-year project like monks working to copy a book at best.
Bit by bit, we got into more and more large-scale sequencing. But the sequencing is enormously important because it provides the possibility of searching by computer.
When I showed up at Washington University one day with a computer terminal kind of under my arm, people looked at it and said, "What are you going to do with that?" This is a genetics department.
Genomes were supposed to be too complex to be able to reassemble them in the computer.
Without computers, we simply would be dead in the water.
Computers and genomics were made for each other. Genetic information is digital. It's like binary code. It just happens to use 4 digits instead of 2. It is amazingly accurate, and that's what biology gets from digital information.
The Human Genome Project contributed a cultural change about data sharing because the Genome Project was about sharing data almost immediately. And while it seems obvious now, it wasn't obvious then. That required significant effort.
I think I'm quite lucky as a scientist because I grew up always sharing data. The community around me, the genomics community, the worm and fly communities as well. It's just a default that you're going to share everything. You're going to share the code. You're going to share everything by publishing, but you're going to share it before publishing. You're going to share half-cooked ideas. And in fact, this is a wonderful thing. It's liberating.
It would have been virtually criminal to try to hoard discoveries that meant the difference in life and death in people.
This is information which we'll be using for centuries. The sooner we get it and everybody has access to it who wants it, the faster we can move in terms of understanding how life works and how disease occurs.
Patients invest a certain degree of fear about genetics. Who's going to find this out? How will it be used against me?
A lot of the ethical and social considerations that we're struggling with today really have historical roots in the early 1900s in the United States, where we had many states that had laws that allowed us to forcibly sterilize people and prevent them from having children based on whether we as a society felt that they were genetically fit.
So at the beginning of the Human Genome Project, we got it right of bringing in the social scientists, the ethicists, the lawyers, and we now have helped to provide a whole generation of scientists that are focusing on the ethical and social issues of genomics.
The sequencing of the human genome was a monumental achievement. Decades of work, thousands of scientists, billions of dollars, and we get this first roadmap for what makes up the human genome. It's an incredibly exciting moment. At the same time, it's just the beginning of what's really a much longer voyage.
And let's again be audacious, but let's not be unrealistic about what's possible.
I think the next 10 years are going to see some exciting developments in genomics, particularly those where we start to use genomic information as part of routine medical care. And that'll be applied to dealing with diseases like cancer, hypertension, diabetes, and Alzheimer's disease.
I dream of the day when every young mother brings a young girl or young boy home from the hospital with a little gene card, and they say, this is the way you should prepare this child's health care. It's exhilarating.
You should not have to worry about becoming a victim of healthcare fraud, waste, or abuse. That's why we're here, to make sure all of us are protected. We are on the ground, working tirelessly to hold bad actors accountable, detecting fraudulent activities in vital health and human services programs, and harnessing data to protect your tax dollars and ensure quality of care. We don't work for a bottom line. We work for you. We are accountants, data analysts, law enforcement officers, lawyers, and other professionals committed to fighting for your health and welfare. That's what drives us every day. We are the Office of Inspector General.
More than 143 million Americans, almost half the population of the United States, live in areas that are vulnerable to earthquakes. The West Coast is particularly vulnerable and has experienced 30 earthquakes of magnitude 5.0 or greater over the last 10 years. But earthquakes can happen almost anywhere in the U.S. In the central U.S., the new Madrid seismic zone is a significant threat that can affect 8 states. Even parts of the East Coast are vulnerable. Alaska and Hawaii are also prone to major earthquakes. In any location, earthquakes have the potential for loss of life and economic and social disruptions. For a community, critical lifelines are drinking water and wastewater utilities. With thousands of utilities across the country, there will be many located in medium or high hazard areas for earthquakes. Utilities should be aware of this earthquake hazard and the potentially devastating impacts to public health and the environment. For a drinking water system, an earthquake can cause hundreds, even thousands of breaks in water pipelines, as well as ruptures in storage tanks and collapses of treatment buildings. For example, in 2014, a magnitude 6.0 earthquake near the city of Napa, California, caused 120 water main breaks during the first week and damaged a water storage tank. Some customers completely lost drinking water service or were on precautionary boil water advisories. And wastewater systems in the U.S. are certainly not immune to damage from earthquakes. The impacts could create sewage backups in homes and releases of untreated wastewater into the environment. Additionally, earthquakes can cause massive power outages, which can interrupt or completely halt pumping and treatment operations. So, what can water and wastewater utilities do to mitigate potential damage and service disruptions? Start by using EPA's Earthquake Resilience Guide for water and wastewater utilities. This easy-to-use, clickable guide is based on the experience of many utilities that have successfully mitigated impacts from earthquakes. The guide takes you step by step. The first step is to understand the earthquake threat to your utility. This step will take you to the EPA's Earthquake Interactive Maps. These maps show areas in the country that are more likely to experience damaging earthquakes. You can type in or zoom into your location and find out about the level of hazard at your utility. For example, zooming into Memphis, Tennessee, you see a pink area, meaning there is a very high chance that Memphis and its utilities could suffer from damaging earthquakes. The next step is to identify vulnerable assets and determine consequences. Start by making a list of assets that are critical to your operations. These may include electrical panels, certain pumps, pipes, and even buildings. Then determine if an asset may be damaged or fail from the shaking or ground motion. For example, the guide tells you which types of pipes and building structures may be vulnerable to earthquakes. Then, you can determine how potential failures may impact your facility operations. Will you lose some capacity or disrupt your entire system? Then, it's time to choose mitigation measures to protect your critical assets. Here, EPA's guide can help identify mitigation strategies. For example, one strategy is to use codes and standards when building new structures or retrofitting existing facilities for seismic hazards. Another strategy described more in the guide is to protect the backbone of the system, including key treatment facilities, transmission lines, and storage tanks, because you can't protect every pipeline. A lower cost mitigation option is to anchor and brace pipes, tanks, pumps, and laboratory shelving. Your customers and your community are relying on you to provide safe water for drinking and to treat wastewater to protect their health and the environment. So start to make your utility earthquake resilient by using EPA's Earthquake Resilience Guide and EPA's interactive earthquake maps at www.epa.gov/water utility response and click on the bullet Build Earthquake Resilience.
A chance to send your name to the sun. Testing systems for our Orion spacecraft. And sizing up Earth from space. A few of the stories to tell you about this week at NASA.
Want to join NASA on a historic mission of discovery?
We're inviting people around the world to join actor William Shatner by submitting their names online to be stored on a microchip that will travel aboard our historic Parker Solar Probe mission.
The first ever spacecraft to the sun.
To learn more and add your name to the mission, check out go.nasa.gov/hot-ticket. Names can be submitted until April 27, 2018. Parker Solar Probe is targeted for launch in summer 2018 to travel through the brutal heat and radiation of the sun's atmosphere, making critical observations to help us better understand how stars work and improve forecasts of major space weather events affecting life on Earth, as well as satellites and astronauts in space. The crew module for the next test of our Orion spacecraft's launch abort system recently arrived at our Johnson Space Center in Houston. Targeted for April 2019, the test will help ensure the spacecraft can carry astronauts to safety during a launch emergency and is a critical safety milestone in our effort to send crewed missions to the moon and beyond. A test version of our Space Launch System rocket's intertank is one of 5 components that make up the rocket's 212-foot-tall core stage. It was shipped recently from Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans to our Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, for tests to ensure the rocket can withstand the more than 8 million pounds of thrust experienced during liftoff and spaceflight. Our ICESat-2 mission will use an instrument called the Advanced Topographic Laser Altimeter System, or ATLAS, to measure the height of Earth's surface, in particular the changing polar ice. The instrument precisely times how long it takes light particles to bounce off Earth and return to the satellite. ICESat-2 is slated to launch in September from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. That's what's up this week at NASA. For more on these and other stories, follow us on the web at nasa.gov/twan.